Let's speak now to Francis Hoar, a public law barrister, for his perspective on this. Now, it's one of those things that snuck out, didn't it? And all the doom and gloom of everything else going on, all the budget, immigration statistics. Oh, yeah, we're just going to get rid of juries, by the way. It's like, what? What? That was my reaction. What was yours?
Well, we now learn, I think it was said at the time that this was a leak, and it's always suspicious when there's a leak like this because one wonders whether it was to test opinion. And now there are suggestions. I think Guido Fawkes made that suggestion this morning that this might not be implemented at all. But the real problem with this is that way that the government is going about it. Well, I mean, the real problem is the suggestion itself. But before we get to that, how is it appropriate for the government simply to announce a policy based, it seems, upon the conclusions of a judge, Lord Justice Leveson, who didn't actually go as far as this anyway? And of course, Lord Justice Leveson has, I would say, a checkered career as a public inquiry judge, bearing in mind what I think many people consider to be his extremely dangerous conclusions in the Leveson inquiry. But putting that to one side, that is not an appropriate way to go about dismantling, and that is what it would do, a right that has been perhaps the earliest statutory right that we have in this country. And it was grossly insulting for both Lord Justice Leveson and apparently Lammy to have suggested that this somehow isn't a right because it's not within the European Convention of Human Rights, which is an international charter that's less than 80 years old. It is, as I say, the oldest statutory right in this country. It's one of the only four provisions of the Magna Carta that are left, and the Magna Carta prefigured statute at all because it prefigured the emergence of Parliament as we know it now in the 13th century, and in fact jury trial goes before that. So it couldn't be more of an ancient right. It isn't used now for civil cases other than very occasionally for actions against the police and defamation, but it is essential. I agree that when accused of a serious offence, not all offences, but a serious offence, one person does not have that power for the obvious reason that there is always a risk that that one person may have an undue pressure from the state. That's not to say that judges don't, by and large, do an excellent job, and they do. Obviously, you've drawn out some exceptions from that, but by and large, judges of criminal cases are experienced and measured and do a very difficult and hard job. But they don't want, by and large, also to be judges of fact in these criminal cases. They have a role to be the judges of the law, and that's a distinction that has worked extremely well.
One thing that concerns me is the judicial system in this country is increasingly, I think, under attack, or at least facing criticism about its politicisation. And when we talk about there being a singular judge presiding over a case, there is also the matter of the interpretation of the law and how much one's own attitudes and views of the world can impact upon that interpretation. And I think about, for instance, when you see judges, we come across rulings in newspapers where judges said about a particular young person, well, you know, because he was a young black kid brought up on this housing estate, the fact he's gone and nicked 1,000 mobile phones this year, it needs to be taken into account that, you know, where he comes from. And you think, well, surely that isn't a sane way of approaching justice. Similarly, the ECHR and the way that we interpret it, and then other countries don't, the human rights barristers, whether it be in the matrix chambers or whatnot, who seem to almost become left-wing activists, that, to me, in itself, is something I wasn't aware. Maybe this has always been the case, but I wasn't aware of there being this idea that many people in the judicial system are sort of, you know, bought-up socialists who are sort of using the profession to impose upon the rest of us their view of the world. I mean, do you think that's a fair interpretation? Has there been this shift in the judicial system towards sort of a left-wing politicisation? Or is that just sort of, you know, I sit there and read scurrilous headlines in the Daily Mail too much?
A mixture. I think it's right to say that there's an increasing amount of judges who perhaps come from the left, and that's perhaps a reflection of the way the profession has developed and changed. I think that's probably true. I also think, as I said, that my experience of the judiciary is that by and large they do an excellent job. There are obviously bad apples in any profession, but they do it conscientiously. And of course, one thing one should remember is that the extent to which they give credence to various considerations in sentences, sometimes taken wholly out of context, it has to be said in reports like that, is partly a reflection, or is largely a reflection of the fact that they have to, due to the guidelines that have become tram lines rather than guidelines, although they're not supposed to be, removing judicial discretion. And I think when you give a professional discretion, they tend to make better decisions than they do if they are hidebound by this guidance. I think another point to get across is, maybe you're going to ask me about this separately, but I think it is important to get across how utterly fallacious this point about delays is. The government is prepared to spend 15 billion more pounds on welfare, which should be cut severely because it's totally out of control. They're spending. They announced an expenditure increase of approximately that, if not more, to the NHS before negotiating pay packets, which meant that all of that immediately went on pay. That was reckless in the extreme, and yet they cut to the bone. This government, the last government, the Blair government, not so much the government before this rot started, they have cut to the bone legal aid. They've cut to the bone judicial sitting times. I have friends who sit as part-time judges. Their days that they can sit have been reduced, even though they'd be quite happy to sit more. There are many recorders, and they could be part-time circuit judges who sit in Crown Courts. There are many more who could sit, and those who sit could sit for much longer. There is absolutely no reason for this delay other than the fact that the government puts the second duty of the state after the defence of the realm, which is the preservation of justice, so incredibly low, so low that it could appoint somebody as stupid, frankly, as David Lammy to be Justice Secretary, which is, I think, an insult to the profession that he is in one of the most ancient offices of state of Lord Chancellor. It's utterly insulting to have somebody as stupid as him in that position, and I don't use that word lightly.
I loved that. Francis Hoar, round of applause for that man. Oh, yes. Anyone just has to watch David Lammy on Masterminds to realise that he doesn't have one. Francis Hoar, thank you ever so much, especially for that impassioned edition about the appointment of David Lammy to one of the most historic and important and critical positions